On June 22, 1941, the military machine of the Third Reich unleashed Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in the history of human warfare. More than 3 million German soldiers stormed across the border into the Soviet Union. To the soldiers of the Wehrmacht, this was never supposed to become a long, grinding war of attrition. In their minds, this was supposed to be a victory lap. Fast, brutal, inevitable. The German High Command was poisoned by a fatal arrogance. Adolf Hitler had famously declared, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." And why would they doubt it? German forces had smashed Poland in weeks, crushed France in a month, and driven the British off the continent. They believed they were unstoppable, untouchable. They looked at the Soviet Red Army and saw what they thought was a primitive, culturally inferior, badly led mass that would collapse the moment German blitzkrieg hit full force. And for the first few months, that illusion seemed real. The Germans surged forward for hundreds of miles. They captured millions of Soviet prisoners. In the letters sent back home during the summer, the mood was almost triumphant, almost casual. Some soldiers wrote about the endless dusty plains. Some complained more about the heat and the mosquitoes than about the enemy. They had been told they would be home before the autumn leaves fell. And because of that overwhelming confidence, because of that blind and supreme arrogance, the German High Command made one of the most catastrophic decisions of the entire war. They did not issue winter clothing. They calculated it out, coldly, mathematically. They convinced themselves the war would be over by October. But October came, and the war did not end. As the German spearheads stalled only miles from the gates of Moscow, the autumn rains turned the unpaved Russian roads into a bottomless sea of freezing mud, a season the Russians called the Rasputitsa. Then November arrived, and the mud froze solid. The temperature crashed. The winter of 1941 became one of the coldest in recorded Russian history. Temperatures fell to minus 30 degrees Celsius, then to minus 40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers, still dressed in lightweight summer cotton tunics, were thrown into a frozen world that felt less like war and more like a nightmare from another planet. They wrapped themselves in whatever they could steal or find. Women's shawls, newspapers, curtains, anything at all to stop the wind from cutting through their bodies. And the letters they sent home changed completely. The swagger vanished. The confidence disappeared. In its place came something darker, slower, more terrifying: despair. A creeping realization that they had marched into something they did not understand. One German infantryman wrote in his diary, "The cold is the only thing we feel anymore. It is a physical weight. It breaks our bones. When the trees freeze, the sap expands and the trunks snap with a sound like a rifle shot. We jump every time, thinking it is a Russian sniper. God has forsaken us in this ice." And it was not just the men who were failing. The machines were failing too. German equipment had been designed for the temperate climate of Western Europe. In the Soviet winter, that engineering began to collapse. The lubricating oil in MG-34 machine guns froze solid, turning weapons into useless metal. Tank engines had to have fires lit beneath their hulls just to thaw the oil enough to start. Even the soldiers' boots betrayed them. The steel cleats on the bottoms of German jackboots, built for strength and durability, became conduits for death, pulling the cold straight from the ice into the soldiers' feet. Frostbite spread through the ranks like an epidemic. The invincible Wehrmacht was not advancing now. It was freezing to death in its own trenches. If the weather was a nightmare, then the enemy became something even worse, a revelation. A shock so deep it tore apart everything German soldiers thought they knew about war. The men of the Wehrmacht had expected the Red Army to surrender once surrounded, just as French and Belgian forces had done the year before. That was the pattern they believed in. Encircle, crush, advance, repeat. But on the Eastern Front, that pattern broke. When Soviet units were trapped, they did not throw down their weapons, they did not raise white flags. They fought until the last bullet was gone. And then, when there was nothing left to fire, they fixed bayonets and charged directly into German machine guns. That was the moment the Germans began to understand. This war was different. This enemy was different. The letters and diary entries from the front show a kind of disbelief that almost sounds superstitious, a fear mixed with confusion, a sense that they were facing something beyond ordinary human endurance. One German artillery officer wrote of his disbelief in words that stripped away every illusion. He said, "We fired artillery at their positions for 3 hours. The ground was turned to ash. Nothing could have survived. But when our infantry advanced, The Russians rose up from the craters like ghosts. They were bleeding, half frozen, but they still fired. They do not fight like men. They fight like something made of the earth itself. They do not know when they are beaten. That shock did more than frighten the Germans. It shattered the myth they had been fed since the beginning. They had been told they were the master race. They had been told they were facing an inferior opponent. But now they were staring at an enemy who could sleep in the snow without a tent, who lived on frozen bread and melted snow, and who fought with a ferocity that made even veterans of the Western Front tremble. The average Soviet infantryman became, in German eyes, a figure of hatred and terror, but also of grim respect. And as the cold deepened, the Soviet Union unleashed its reserves. While the Germans were stiffening in frozen misery, the Red Army was adapting to the ice, moving through it, using it like a weapon. Then came another horror rolling out of the blizzards, the 34. German soldiers watched in disbelief as these tanks emerged through the snowstorms like predators. Their wide tracks let them glide across deep drifts where narrow-track German panzers bogged down, slipped, and stalled. Their thick-sloped armor turned aside standard German anti-tank rounds with humiliating ease. One German panzer commander described the scene with naked fear. He wrote, "Out of the whiteout they appeared. Our 37mm anti-tank guns are useless. We call them the door knockers, because all they do is knock on the Russian armor before the monster crushes us. They drive through the snow as if it is not there, and they hunt us down in our frozen steel coffins." And yet even worse than the tanks, for many German soldiers, were the Siberian ski divisions. These troops, brought in from the Far East, were wrapped in pure white winter camouflage. They moved silently across the deep snow, on skis, fast and ghost-like. To freezing, snow-blinded Germans crouched in dark gray uniforms, the Siberians seemed to materialize from nowhere, invisible until the final seconds. Diaries from the Moscow front described the terror of those night raids in words that feel almost haunted. One German corporal, in a letter that was never mailed, wrote, "You cannot hear them coming. You look out into the black blizzard and see nothing. Then the snow itself seems to rise up and a Russian bayonet is in the throat of the man next to you. We are not hunters anymore. We are the prey." That sentence said everything. The hunters had become the hunted. The army that had crossed the border in June with confidence, swagger, and contempt was now staring into the dark and seeing ghosts in the snow. By December 1941, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive counteroffensive that slammed into the freezing, exhausted Germans and drove them back from the gates of Moscow. It was the first major defeat the German army had suffered in the entire war. But the strategic setback was only part of the disaster. What really broke inside the German soldiers was something deeper, more permanent, more devastating: the psychological collapse. The letters sent home during the winter of 1941 to 1942 are among the most haunting documents of the war. These were no longer the words of men writing about swift victory or easy conquest. These were the words of soldiers who had realized, too late, that they had been lied to. The promise of a glorious campaign had dissolved into a meat grinder of blood, ice, and endless suffering. One German medic, writing to his wife, captured that collapse with brutal clarity. He wrote, "Everything they told us in Berlin was a lie. The Russian is not an animal to be swatted away. He is a giant, and we have woken him up. I look around at our men. We look like beggars. We look like walking corpses. There is no glory here, only the endless white, and the cold, and the death. I do not think any of us will ever see Germany again." That was the moment the truth finally stood naked before them. The soldiers who survived that first winter on the Eastern Front were no longer the same men who had crossed the border in June. The arrogance they carried with them had been buried under the snows of December. What they learned there was written not in theory, not in propaganda, but in frozen bodies, broken machines, and shattered belief. They learned the limits of military machinery. They learned the madness of hubris. And they learned the terrifying, unbreakable resilience of the human spirit when it is defending its own homeland. When German soldiers wrote home about facing the Red Army in winter, they did not fill those letters with talk of tactical maneuvers or glorious conquest. That language was gone, burned away, frozen out of them. Instead, they wrote about ghosts in the snow. They wrote about weapons that would not fire. They wrote about men who would not die. The winter of 1941 did not end the war, but it did end something that may have mattered even more in that moment. It ended the illusion of the invincible Third Reich. The German High Command had kicked in the door to the Soviet Union, expecting the whole structure to collapse beneath the blow. Instead, they stepped into a frozen abyss. And from that abyss, neither their army nor their empire would ever truly return. If you want the next script, send it over.